Imagine a world where knights in shining armor and queens in glittering gowns walked the streets, where tournaments were as common as football games, and where the air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and the cheers of the crowd. This was the world of medieval France, a time when kings and queens ruled with a mix of grandeur and brutality, and the lives of the common people were often overshadowed by the extravagant displays of the noble elite. One such moment of opulence and power was the coronation of Charles VI of France, a young king who, despite his youth, was determined to dazzle his subjects with a display of royal magnificence. The coronation and its festivities were a spectacle of wealth and luxury. The air was filled with the shimmer of cloth of gold, the soft rustle of ermine, and the rich patterns of velvets and silks. Crowns studded with jewels and the gleam of precious metals adorned the heads of the nobility, creating a scene that seemed almost too brilliant to be real. A grand banquet was held in the same hall where Charles V, the king's father, had once entertained the emperor, and the pageant that followed was a reenactment of the fall of Troy, complete with wheeled castles and ships that moved about the hall. It was a show designed to awe the onlookers and solidify the king's authority. At the high table, seated with the king and queen, were only prelates and a select few ladies, including the Dame de Cousy and the Duchess of Bar. The king wore his golden crown and a surcoat of scarlet furred with ermine, a choice that seemed particularly ill-suited for the sweltering heat of August. The hall was so crowded and hot that the queen, who was 7 months pregnant, nearly fainted, and the Dame de Cousy did faint. The press of people was so great that one table of ladies was overturned, and windows had to be broken open to let in some fresh air. Despite the discomfort, the queen and many of the ladies had to retreat to their chambers, a stark contrast to the intended grandeur of the event. The heat and the crowds also affected the tournaments that followed. The dust raised by the horses' hooves was so thick that the knights complained, but the Sire de Cousy, a renowned knight, still managed to shine. The king ordered 200 barrels of water to be brought in to lay the dust, but the next day the dust was as bad as ever. The discomfort of the participants and the audience was a small price to pay for the spectacle of chivalry and the display of the king's power. In the midst of all this splendor, the leading bourgeois of Paris presented the king and queen with gifts of jewels and gold vessels, hoping to secure a remittance of taxes. The gifts were carried by 2 men dressed as ancient sages, and they were enclosed in a litter covered in fine silk gauze, allowing the sparkle of the jewels and the gleam of the gold to be seen through the fabric. Despite the imaginative presentation, the king's advisors were not persuaded, and 2 months later, when the king left for a tour of the south, taxes in Paris were raised to pay for the queen's entry and the new journey. This sumptuous tour, intended to display the king's sovereignty and address the people's grievances, only resulted in higher taxes, and the manipulation of the currency further worsened the situation for the poor. One of the most influential figures in this period was the Sire de Cousy, a nobleman who reached the age of 50 in 1390. He was a leading noble, trusted by the king for both political missions and military commands. He held official positions as Captain General of Auvergne and Guyenne, and was a member of the Royal Council. In 1389, when King Charles VI set out with his brother Louis and his uncle Bourbon to confer with the Pope in Avignon, Cousy commanded the royal escort. The journey was meant to address the crushing tyranny and intolerable exactions of the Duc de Berry's officers, who had driven 40,000 people from Languedoc to Aragon. The king's journey was also an opportunity for him to learn how his subjects were governed and to make himself more beloved by them, as he needed funds for his lavish spending. However, the Dukes of Burgundy and Berry were excluded from the journey, which they perceived as an affront. They vowed to make those who advised the king regret their decision, a threat that highlighted the political tensions within the royal court. The journey to Avignon was a grand affair, with the royal suite filling several boats as they traveled down the Rhone. The king made stops at various towns, where he was greeted by children dressed in the royal colors, waving flags and cheering him on. Upon his arrival in Avignon, Charles VI was met by Pope Clement and 26 cardinals, and he attended a splendid banquet. Despite his financial constraints, the king was determined to be remembered for his magnificence. During the conferences with the Pope, the king and his counselors proposed a plan to establish French control over Italy by placing Louis of Orleans in the Kingdom of Adria and Louis II of Anjou in the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily. However, these plans were complicated by the death of Pope Urban VI and the election of Boniface IX, who was supported by the people of Rome. The French and the Pope agreed to pursue efforts to remove Boniface, but the king's promise to restore the church to unity was more a gesture of intent than a practical plan. While these serious matters were being discussed, the king and his entourage engaged in lighter activities. They spent their nights in song and dance with the ladies of Avignon, and a literary competition on courtly love was held. The competition, known as the Cent Ballads, debated whether fidelity or inconstancy brought greater satisfaction in love. The debate was a popular pastime among the nobility, but it was more of a game than a deeply felt ideal. The king's progress through Languedoc was a grand tour, with each town welcoming him with processions and feasts. The royal intervention aimed to address the grievances of the people, and the hated Bédizac, the governor of Béziers, was arrested and executed for his oppressive rule. The people acclaimed the king for his justice, and they voted to provide him with a substantial sum of money. In Toulouse, the king received a proposal from Geno's ambassadors to lead a campaign against the Berber kingdom of Tunis. The plan was to suppress the Barbary pirates who were raiding Geno's commerce and selling captured Christians into slavery. The Genos offered to supply the necessary fleet and troops, while the French would provide the knights and squires. The proposed objective was the port of Mahdia, the pirates' main base. The campaign was seen as a noble enterprise that would bring glory to the French knights and protect Christian interests in the Mediterranean. The world of medieval France was one of grandeur and excess, but it was also a world of political intrigue and conflict. The coronation of Charles VI and the subsequent events highlight the tension between the display of power and the practical challenges of governance. The nobility's lavish lifestyle and the king's desire for magnificence often came at the expense of the common people, who bore the brunt of the taxes and economic manipulations. The Sire de Coucy, a figure of both military and political importance, played a crucial role in this period, navigating the complex web of loyalty and ambition that defined the medieval court. The proposed campaign against the Berbers was a reflection of the era's ideals of chivalry and the desire to protect Christian interests, even as the political landscape remained fraught with challenges and uncertainties.